But there's breaking news coming into CNN right now, a major development in the civil war in Syria. The Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel now saying the U.S. has evidence that chemical weapons have been used in that conflict by the Syrian regime. This comes just a few days after a top Israeli intelligence official similarly said Israel believes the Syrian military has used chemical weapons, specifically sarin gas. Let's go to our White House correspondent, Dan Lothian. Dan, the White House has just released copies of letters, identical letters, sent to Senator Carl Levin, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and Senator John McCain, the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, stipulating that U.S. intelligence, the assessment now is that the Syrian regime has used chemical weapons, which earlier the president had insisted if that were true, it would be, in his words, a game changer.
That's right, Wolf, and this is indeed a major development because earlier this week, Jay Carney was asked about some of these claims from the Israelis about chemical weapons being used inside Syria, and he said that the administration was skeptical, and now the administration saying that they have gotten information and came to this conclusion within the last 24 hours. And you pointed out those two letters that were sent from the president's legislative director of legislative affairs, Miguel Rodriguez, sent to Senators Carl Levin, also Senators John McCain, Senator John McCain, and in that letter spelling out some of the details, saying in part, quote, our intelligence community does assess with varying degrees of confidence that the Syrian regime has used chemical weapons on a small scale in Syria, specifically the chemical agent sarin. This assessment is based in part on physiological samples. Our standard of evidence must build on these intelligence assessments as we seek to establish credible and corroborated facts. But there is this still big question, Wolf, because the samples that are out there, at least according to this letter, officials saying that they can't confirm exactly how the exposure occurred and under what conditions. There's also the big issue, and you alluded to this at the top of this report, what happens next? President Obama has been very clear saying that the use of chemical weapons in Syria would be a red line, that it would be a game changer. The administration now being very cautious, spelling out in that letter that while they do have this intelligence information, that they want to make sure that they have credible, real facts that will guide the decisions moving forward. Now, one other point, Wolf, it's interesting that these letters came out at a time when President Obama today, during his remarks at the Bush Library out there in Texas, a library that has this interactive exhibit that talks about and deals with some of the controversial measures during the Bush administration after 9/11. So I think that's quite ironic that they are now, specifically in this letter, spelling out how they want to be careful with the intelligence that they have, make sure that they have all the facts on the ground before they decide what steps to take next.
It's a good point because the intelligence community, according to this letter, believes with a certain degree of confidence that the Syrians have used sarin gas, which would be illegal under international law. But then in the letter, it does have this line, and you point to it, Dan, given the stakes involved and what we have learned from our own recent experience, intelligence assessments alone are not sufficient. Only credible and corroborated facts that provide us with some degree of certainty will guide our decision-making and strengthen our leadership of the international community. A clear reference to the intelligence assessments that the Iraqis under Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, an intelligence assessment that proved to be wrong once the U.S. went in and searched for those WMD stockpiles and couldn't find any. Stand by for a moment, Dan. I want to play the clip. Here's the Defense Secretary, Chuck Hagel, speaking just a little while ago on this very sensitive issue.
This, I think, was meant to be a kind of a wrap-up for the 5 days, which we can do. But I want to read a statement because I think this is going to consume most of your attention as it has the last couple of days. This morning, the White House delivered a letter to several members of Congress on the topic of chemical weapons use in Syria. The letter, which we made available to you here shortly as soon as George gets it, we'll get it to you, states that the U.S. intelligence community assesses with some degree of varying confidence that the Syrian regime has used chemical weapons on a small scale, in Syria, specifically the chemical agent sarin. As I've said, the intelligence community has been assessing information for some time on this issue, and the decision to reach this conclusion was made within the past 24 hours. And I've been in contact with senior officials in Washington today, and most recently the last couple of hours, on this issue. We cannot confirm the origin of these weapons, but we do believe that any use of chemical weapons in Syria would very likely have been originated with the Assad regime. As the letter states, the President has made it clear that the use of chemical weapons or the transfer of such weapons to terrorist groups would be unacceptable. The United States has an obligation to fully investigate, including with all key partners and allies, and through the United Nations, evidence of chemical weapons use in Syria. Over the past week, I've traveled, as you all know, to 5 countries in the Middle East, all of whom have expressed concern about the deteriorating situation in Syria. And you've asked me on several occasions about chemical weapons use. As I've said, this is serious business. We need all the facts. The letter will be available as soon as George gets it to you. And as you all know, I have no more to say about this until we get the full story, as I think that will be the position of the administration. With that, glad to take the questions.
Does this cross the red line?
Well, first I would answer your question this way. We need all the facts. We need all the information. What I've just given you is what our intelligence community has said they know. As I've also said, they're still assessing and they're still looking at what happened, who was responsible, and the other specifics that we'll need. As to a red line, my role as Secretary of Defense is to give the President options on a policy issue. That's a policy issue. And we'll be prepared to do that at such time that the President requires options.
Did you say varying degrees of confidence? Is that the phrase you used?
I did.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that we still have some uncertainties about what was used, what kind of chemical was used, where it was used, who used it.
But not if.
Well, as I've said in the statement, in talking to our intelligence people here the last couple of hours, they have a reasonable amount of confidence that some amount of chemical weapons was used.